Hello and good afternoon, friends. Today I want to talk to you about what happens when you don't pass a Perk test on a septic system, right? Good question. Let's get into it. So, septic systems, they're a complicated beast, but they're not too bad. It just takes a little bit of getting used to and a little bit of know-how to figure out what you're supposed to do. So, let's talk septic. When you have a home, right, that is out in a little bit more of a rural area, maybe you don't happen to have, public sewer, public water available, you have to come up with a way to deal with your wastewater. So how do most people do it? They use what's called a septic system, right? The septic system is also known as an OSDS, and that's going to be on-site sewage disposal system. It's designed so that way every time you flush your toilet, it's got somewhere to go, and you can get rid of the water. Now, not every septic system is the same, just like not every house is the same. So some systems have a little bit of nuance and a little bit of change that needs to happen. So before you even start with the house, you have to do what's called a Perk test. And now this is kind of one of those things where you don't really know what's going to happen until you start. With a normal property, right? You're not going to have a house. You're just going to have land, maybe some trees. You got to clear the trees to figure out where you're going to put this system. So when you go to do a Perk test, you're going to dig a couple holes. You're going to find some site spots on the property that look good. Maybe they're downhill. Maybe they've got good drainage area. They're not super swampy. And then you're going to dig some holes and you're going to figure out, what does that soil look like? Does it drain right? What kind of soil do we have? And then you're going to take those measurements, those notes, how fast everything drained, and then you're going to go back to the county. And you're going to say, hey, Mr. County guy, here's what I'm working with. I want to build a 4-bedroom house on this property. Here's my Perk test results. This is the system I want to go with. Yay or nay? And then they'll tell you yes or no, right? But sometimes that doesn't work. And sometimes you're going to get a failure on your Perk test. Don't panic, but you do need to be aware of what can happen. So in our area, there's going to be really three distinct things that can pop up. A conventional septic system is basically a passing Perk test, right? Normal, gravity fed. Maybe you have a pump if you got like a goofy situation where you got to pump the water up to the drain fields. But the normal soil is working, so you can use a drain field and everything's doing what it's supposed to do. Now, once you start getting into the Perk test, that's where you get into the innovative and advanced systems. Those are going to be your sand mounds, your drip systems, any of the other goofy stuff that's not gravity fed, and generally is going to look a little bit different, have a little bit more bells and whistles, a little bit more fancy. At least in our area, if you have one of those systems, you're required to have a BAT. I'll cover a BAT in a future video, but for the now, we're going to talk about what happens when it doesn't pass. So this is usually where most people get really freaked out and really concerned. And the reason why is that means that you are not going to have a property that can sustain a normal residence. Most of the time in our area, if you don't pass the Perk, they're not going to let you develop on it. But let's just say, for example, you already have a house. The house was built in 1960. The septic failed. The Perk didn't pass. What do we do? So that's where you get into a sticky situation of what's called a holding tank, all right? Holding tanks are going to look just like a normal septic system where you have your inlet in, big concrete box, outlet out, right? But the outlet's gonna be plugged. So you're just gonna have a big vat, right? So every time you run a sink, bathtub, laundry, whatever, all of that water plus the solids goes to the tank. When that tank fills up, you have to pump it, right? So generally in our area, you'll see that usually most companies will put 3,000 gallons of capacity on the property. Now, if you have a family of 4, the math shows that that's probably about 10 days worth of water. So you have to be kind of careful with how much water you're running, right? It limits your showers. It limits what kind of toilets you can have. You have to have low flow. You have to be conscious. And now you have that monthly expense of a couple $100, maybe closer to $1,000, depending on how much water you're going through. And there's nothing you can really do about it. So that's why it's one of those things where you have to be really, really careful. So holding tanks, basically just big box. Generally, it'll be 2 1,500-gallon tanks back to back. All of the water is required by law in our area. I don't know about everywhere else, but in our area, it's required by law. Any wastewater that's produced on the property has to go to the OSDS. And then from there, you get a licensed hauler, and they'll come out, they'll pump out all the juices and take it off to the public municipal facilities, right? So we've got our tank. you got to get into the tank somehow. So that's where the risers come into place. So generally, you're going to have the tank with a normal riser, dead center, and then you're going to have some kind of alarm float tree or something to that effect to let you know as the homeowner, hey, it's time to pump it out. And then you're going to have an alarm panel. These alarm panels will come in a variety of shapes and colors. But let's go back to the risers, right? So on these septic systems with holding tanks, a manhole riser is kind of required, at least on new systems. It's a really good idea so that we can pump all of the liquid out of the tank. If you only have a clean out, you're kind of playing with fire. You got to be careful, right? So that riser, super important to make sure that you have a watertight riser, right? We've already had conversations previously about why do you want a watertight riser or watertight access point on a normal standard conventional septic system, but with the holding tank, it's even more important. So on a conventional system, if you have a leaking toilet or if you have a leaking riser, the biggest thing you have to worry about is your drain field getting oversaturated. But with a holding tank, now you have to worry about every single ounce of water that comes through that riser from rainwater is now costing you money, right? It's more tangible. You can see it more. It sucks. If that riser's leaking, guess who's paying for it? You are, right? So it's super important to make sure you have a watertight riser. Generally, most of the people in our area will use plastic because it's way easier to make sure that that riser is sealed compared to concrete. Concrete, you can get a good seal, but it's a lot harder to do. So a lot of contractors will avoid using concrete for that exact reason. So now we got to talk about the alarms, right? In our area, generally, when you have these risers, you're going to have a float tree. Basically, it's just a PVC pipe with the little bobber looking arm thing, right? That little fella, when it's down, the alarm's off. When it's up, the alarm's on. Very simple. Very much like a sump pump, right? Sump pumps use the exact same kind of floats, but they're far smaller. So this float is going to communicate to an alarm box. Sometimes they're big gray boxes with a red light on it. Sometimes they're little tiny black boxes. Sometimes they're medium-sized gray boxes. They come in a variety of flavors and colors. But the purpose of that box is to tell you, as a homeowner, your stuff's full, right? Time to get pumped out. Generally in our area, they'll leave about 2 days worth of space in that tank, right? And that means that once you hear that alarm, you kind of got to get onto it to get it pumped out before you start running into the issues of it either backing up into the house or overflowing into your yard. Generally, a lot of the contractors in our area will help work with homeowners that have these systems. They'll make it to where you're able to go ahead and purchase 15, 20 pumps at a time, and they'll give you a significantly reduced rate on that bulk purchase. But that's also a couple $1,000s, right? Kind of sucks. Nobody really has that kind of money just to throw away on sewage, right? It's money you're never going to see again. It's literally flushing money down the toilet. So when you have the holding tank, you have to have a watertight riser. You have to pump it regularly. You have to have an alarm. You have to know where that alarm is, right? But the other thing you have to be really aware of is the county now knows you have a holding tank. So it's super important where people will attempt to try and cheat the system. They'll get their own sump pump, they'll get their own grinder pump, they'll get a hose and they'll kick it off into the woods, right? Don't do that. The problem is that people will try to do this to skirt having to pay that fee, or a lot of times you'll see people will reroute their laundry, their utility sinks, their kitchen sinks, stuff that uses a lot of water regularly. They'll reroute that to just the sump pump or just right outside. In our state, that is a finable offense, right? That can get you fined every single day that problem keeps existing. And the state knows you have a holding tank. So if they just happen to be at a neighbor's house for another permit, or a neighbor complains, that's usually where most people run into problems, is the neighbor complains, like, they keep discharging all this sewage in my yard. Now the county's got a complaint, they're coming for you, right? So now you gotta be careful. I generally recommend that if you have a holding tank, very important, you gotta be water conservative. You have to be very, very careful with how much water you use. Borderline almost turn the shower on, rinse, turn the shower off, soap, shower on, shower off, etc., so that way you can avoid having additional water run. Usually what gets people in trouble is the flappers on their toilets. Those flappers will go bad from time to time, and a slow little drip of water can go a long way in really screwing you up, right? So this has really kind of been a rundown of what happens when you have a bad perk rate. The issue is that if you don't have a good perk passing property, you're getting stuck with holding tanks. Maybe you get lucky and you can do innovative and advanced technology, but the problem is it's going to reduce the value of your home, right? When you go to sell your house, nobody's going to want to purchase that home that has a holding tank. So you're going to have to lower the price of the house to get that house to sell, right? It does happen. People do sell those houses all the time. I come across it all the time, right? People will always have us inspect the holding tanks. And generally a holding tank inspection is going to be a little bit different. We'll cover that in a different video. But with a holding tank, your property value is going to decrease. So before you purchase a home or a plot of land, you have to make sure that that property perks. So that way you know that you can put a proper septic system on that house. So that way whatever property you build or whatever value you want to get, you're good to go, right? If you're up the creek without a paddle, there are some grant programs in our area that help homeowners deal with this, but it is an as-need basis. So if there's a lot of people who need it, unfortunately, you're going to be out of luck. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this was useful. Please leave a comment below. Let me know, do you have a holding tank? How do you deal with your holding tank? Are you one of those people who just discharges the sewer or sewage water and all into the woods, right? How much are you paying for it, right? How much did your last pump out cost? How often are you pumping out? These are all valuable things, not only for me, but for the people who are watching these videos, right? Let the next person who might be purchasing a home who doesn't know any better, let them see your experience. That way we can all kind of grow together and learn together. Hit that like button, subscribe. I have more videos posted every day on the World of Well and Septic. Till next time, guys.